Shimasu. Okay, so maybe just some Zen. So feel free to sit as you need to. And I'll just spend a moment just clarifying the mind, stilling the mind, opening the mind into clear, pure awareness. A good tool to get us started is awareness of the body and its shape, and awareness of the breathing. And from there, the awareness becomes crystal and pervasive, equally aware of the outside and the inside. Inside and outside become equal and no distinction. Internal awareness, external awareness, equally. Again, helpful triggers or weight underside, releasing the abdomen. Okay, so just as we get up, take a moment to become aware of the ground, our connection with the ground, relationship with the ground, and the ground is our ally, our support. And we can come up by using the ground. So we send the intention down to receive the up. So we relax down. So down is primary. We release down, relax down, and we keep our alignment and verticality. And we do that, and we release down, we are sent up. Release down, keep our verticality, and we are sent up. Then bring that into our standing. So noticing the alignment of our bones, releasing the body, releasing the joints, letting the weight fall freely through that vertical alignment of the bones. As we keep that vertical alignment and intend down, release down, we allow and invite the ground up into our body to move us. So that's a process of opening, emptying, allowing, and intending. Intending and allowing, yin and yang, together. And intend down and allow the uprising of that ground force. So starting with no weight shift. And then we can add a bit of a weight shift if we want. Make sure those knees are bent. And then a little wider, toes out, knees out. And again, agreeing with the ground and agreeing with gravity. So the ground and gravity meet to cause our free movement, our aligned movement, harmonious movement, because we agree with gravity and we agree and allow the ground. So gravity and ground are able to meet. Gravity allows the ground to give back. And forward and back. Again, releasing down sends us back. Releasing down sends us forward. Our responsibility is our awareness, to have our verticality, and then actively using our intention to allow the ground to give back. Releasing the abdomen. Gravity allows the ground to give back. So it's our job to be in alignment. So the saying in Eastern arts that man or mankind, humankind, is right between heaven and earth. And that's why this point is so important, because it's the midpoint between heaven and earth. Heaven and earth, intersection here. And we're between heaven and earth, so it's our responsibility to align, to allow those forces to be harmonious and intermingle as they naturally would. A little more poetic phrase in the Chinese arts is that we're a living stem. We're a living stem. Potentially. Similar phrase, which can be used for a similar meaning, an empty vessel. An empty vessel in the sense that we allow gravity to work and we allow the ground force to be free to move through us. And then we become this perfect intermediary between heaven and earth, and a living intermediary, not something that's dead, but a living stem, a living intermediary, the purity to allow the harmonious interaction between heaven and earth. Letting those shoulder joints release and open. Light horse dance. So again, arm swings to release the arms, the shoulders, relax upper body and all that. But just along the lines of what we've been talking about here, become much more profound than that. So I'm letting the ground do this for me by releasing to the ground, pressing into the ground, pressing into the ground, so that that moves the arms for me. I need to have intentional vectors for this to happen. Otherwise, it might just create this, which is okay too, but that's creating something a little bit different through using the vectors. Just like we change the angle of the sail on the sailboat to have that wind, neutrality of that force of wind, we can have that send us in whatever direction we want with that sail angle. The sail angle that determines where we go from that objective force of wind, impersonal force of wind, angle of the sail, that's our intentional vector. So our intentional vector is the sail that orientates or directs that objective, impersonal force of nature. In this case, gravity and ground force, heaven and earth. So relaxing, finding an easy, non-effort rhythm that gets the arms moving.
So, Sensei, can I ask a question? So, in thinking about this idea of like intentional vectors, because often I've thought about that in the past, in the context of technique, you're setting an intentional vector in the corner behind someone, or you're setting, as the directionality of a movement. So what I'm hearing you say here is that we're putting that into this conditioning so that there's a pure line of force, that the release down results in that rebound. Is that okay as a summary, like to restate that?
Yeah, and you know what? I would say that's a really important question and point you bring up. I'm very glad that you're highlighting this and exposing this, because what I would say is the internal vectors, forget about outside internal vectors. I'm not talking about that hardly ever. Internal vectors have totally to do with inside.
Okay.
So I'm really glad that we can make that clarification and that emphasis. So intentional vectors are completely having to do with what we're doing with our mind and body and what we're doing through our body. And the body being that empty vessel, the body being that vehicle, empty vehicle for intentional vectors. Now, just to emphasize for a second the term empty vessel, empty vehicle. If my body is not empty, if my intentional vectors are creating this movement, and intentional vectors are creating now this movement, because otherwise, as we're talking about Tai Chi, if I have no intentional vector, pressing down will send me up instead of moving me forward and turning. So intentional vectors are what's determining where we go in the movement. Now, if my body, if I wasn't an empty vessel or empty vehicle, of course, that's a matter of degree. If I don't have any amount of emptiness, which is normal, most people are dense. Then the intentional, first of all, there's probably no intentional vector. Well, there might be intentional vectors, but often there isn't. But even when there is, it's not going to affect the body. Or if it does, it's in a very herky-jerky kind of way. So the empty vessel, empty vehicle allows those intentional vectors to have an effect, for those intentional vectors to move and have an effect. So it'll be the same, and we've used this analogy a lot in Tai Chi. That sail is very dense, heavy canvas, and it's very brittle, and it's almost like a concrete wall instead of a sail, and most people are a concrete brick. So let's turn that fine silken sail into very heavy, maybe even concretized fabric, almost like a concrete wall. So then that wind is going to be not pliable, won't be able to change that sail. And we are now driven by, we're now no longer conscious choosing participants. If the wind blows strongly enough, it will move me, it will move that cement sail and that cement ship, but it's totally passive and totally without any participation, and might be outdone by the forces of nature, knocked over. So we become a living stem, a living participant, and we can choose where we're sending those natural forces. And so we can use that if we need to for self-defense. That kind of is a natural, just kind of a natural result and potential. We don't have to really think about that. We're thinking about how we move ourselves, align ourselves so we're free, open, optimized, more and more pure in our alignment, more and more pure in our reception of these natural forces. Can I be a better empty vessel? Can I be a better living stem? And that just makes everything more harmonious, organic, alive, and free. So that when I move my intentional vector, everything just moves. There's a old quote about mastership. What is mastery? So one definition, there can be many definitions, of course, but one definition that's very strongly out there: a master is simply someone whose mind and body are one, or slightly different way of putting it, whose thoughts and actions are one and the same. There's no disparity. There's no static. There's no obtuseness. Thought and action become one and the same. You don't deliberate. You don't you're not split. You're not splintered. You're not scattered. So you have a thought that happens. Yeah, you have a feeling. Everything responds. The body responds. So that's very much in line what we're talking about now. If I have an empty sail, empty vessel, my sail is this very fine silk instead of this concretized heavy fabric, canvas. And my mind, my spirit moves, everything happens. Everything, and not only this, but eventually the atmosphere around, everything moves. Everything moves. So the alignment and the harmoniousness and the connection becomes bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. It starts organically, but that's one level. Once you start to have it here, it starts to expand to the energetic around you, to the astral body, to the local universal body, to the larger universal body. So when you have a thought, feeling, everything moves. The whole atmosphere moves, the whole piece moves. So that basic definition of mastery, where your thoughts and your actions, there's
Yeah,
no
I think
conflict. So your thoughts and your actions, there's no conflict and there's no separation. That's a wordy way of putting mastery or unification, where your thoughts and your actions are one and the same. That's a cumbersome, wordy way of putting it. Now, for example, it's not a matter, the tricky part of that, it's not a matter of trying to control your thoughts and making your body obey your thoughts and making your thoughts and your body together. It doesn't work that way. It happens, the end result is your thoughts and your body become one and the same, become unified through working this process. So it's a very organic process. The cultivation of the mind and the body brings that closer and closer to that reality of thoughts and actions become more and more just one thing, as opposed to, okay, if my thoughts and actions are one, that's where I'm unified or a master. You can't do that by making that happen. You can't do it with your thoughts. So that's one of the problems with statements like that, is that you might try to, okay, if I just try to make my thoughts and my actions one, you can't do it that way. Just like you can't make yourself relax. Relax, relax. It's a process. It's an organic process. It's a cultivation process. And then you become a different stem. You become a different plant. You become a different organic stem that is automatically, naturally, correctly connected and aligned. So back to this idea that don't worry about external vectors. All the vectors are from within. That's a really good emphasis, is that I'm just working on my own vectors. So hanging out. And then once you have a clear vehicle, empty vessel, this is in line with what I was saying with before, that eventually becomes a larger piece of the universe. As I have my own vectors developing, which also means I'm emptying the vessel becomes more cultivated, more pure, more empty, more divine stem. As my vectors are more free, because I've cultivated both my mind and my body, as my vector becomes more free, that automatically goes out into the quote unquote external world. So let me give you an example in terms of technique. If I'm doing Irami Nage, if I'm working on my own body and mind and my own internal vectors, even when I'm working with a partner. So I'm talking about pretending, imagine I have a partner, an actual physical partner. I'm doing my own work, my hip turning, my alignment, spirals through my arms. I'm doing my own vectors. Not out here. And over time, what happens is that becomes more clear, more open, more empty. And so it naturally externalizes. So now my spirals are going out there. And then my spirals are going out there to that corner, like you're saying. I put my intention or my vector out there. And now it goes out there just because I've become bigger in my sphere, bigger in my little pebble that drops becomes bigger rock or that medium, that water becomes clearer and easier to respond. So okay, I think we're back.
Okay, yeah, sorry. You've been pausing quite a bit through the half hour, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as I work my own vectors through the natural process of refining, cultivating body and the mind, that becomes more and more externalized, becomes more and more extensive. And there's a little issue with external, because again, we started out actually the class, just interestingly enough, we start out the class with Zazen, inside and outside are the same. Inside awareness, outside awareness, eventually it becomes one open pane of glass or one open clarity. Interesting, because now I'm saying that once I have this open and clear, doing this inside and doing it outside becomes the same thing. Now the internal arts are about cultivating this and clarifying this. And so I work my own internal vectors. And eventually that becomes more extensive. Now, that's not to say that you can't do outside first. In fact, most people do that. And like you were saying, sending that vector out to the corner there or sending it where you want to go, that's where most people go to. So that's not wrong. It's not wrong at all. In fact, you know, basic saying we have in Aikido, extend ki. And, you know, wherever you're going, extend ki, project ki. And that is exactly intentional vectors. Yes. But that's totally fine. And again, I would say that's where most people are training. And that's better than not doing it. That's better than just using your muscles. Way better. But what I suggest is that if you stay with that, and that's all that you know, there's not necessarily any transformation inside. There's not necessarily any cultivation, transmutation inside at all. Let's see if I can kind of illustrate that a little bit. Let's say I've gotten really good at ki extension, mental projection, and been doing it for many, many years. And so I need to animate it a little bit or exaggerate a little bit. So I have big extension. But you see this. Big extension. But I'm not totally unified or pristine. Now, of course, I can work mechanically, physically on having better posture, keeping better posture. But the inner attitude, inner energy, a good chance it's still this. Okay, so it's not necessarily changing anything inside. I might be becoming, I'm becoming a stronger sender, stronger ki flow. The wind is stronger, but the sail isn't refining. So the sail stays kind of dense and crude, heavy. Now we get stronger with our ki and our ki extension, which is the wind. And so as our wind gets stronger, intention gets stronger, intentional vectors, the wind, it's able to move that heavy, dense sail and move it more and more and stronger and stronger. And it looks like I'm doing better and better, stronger movement, clearer movement. My sail is straight, so my posture is good, but that sail isn't refining. I'm getting stronger in the mind, stronger in ki extension, ki flow, aligning that heavy sail, but the sail isn't refining. It's not becoming lighter, more subtle. So the vector, working the vectors inside is that refining. It's the spiritual straw cleaner, spiritual tube cleaner.
Oh, like a pipe cleaner.
Pipe cleaner. It's a spiritual pipe cleaner. Okay. So yes, this is actually, you might say, an added or extra dimension. This is like why I say most people are doing the external, making the wind stronger, make the intention stronger, and hopefully having a pretty straight sail, but this is another dimension, another true internal arts development. Spiritual pipe cleaner, where this becomes empty, open, pure, empty vessel, living stem. So my internal vector, they're internal, they're my vectors, and then naturally it becomes external. And my point is, you do external vectors, that's fine. That's what most training is for most people, but that doesn't mean at all that any of this is happening, any of the internal cultivation is happening. Doesn't mean that's happening at all. It won't happen unless it's being consciously worked. Touch upon something that this is kind of touching upon is the verticality. Mary Heine Sensei talks about the purity, the pristineness of the vertical line. So this is more, so that's touching this. Where one simple reason why that's related is because that's something that you totally do for yourself. You're doing that inside. You're doing, so that's an example of total purification, clarification, cultivation of myself. So that's my intentional vector. I'm working on that for myself. And then it's almost just like, it's almost a total secondary focus of me that I'm doing a technique. This is my main focus. And the technique is literally a secondary attention, secondary focus. So that's cultivation. So again, back to the internal vectors. Okay, so something as simple as an arm swing like this is actually working all that. Can I, for example, what will tend to happen is every time I drop down, I'll have to make it bigger. So it's, you can see it. Am I collapsing? So yeah, there's a wave coming through me because I'm bounced back up, but all this collapsation, all this deadening, all this lack of alignment connection, just for a fraction of a second. That's a big deal. Eventually, that's a very big problem, very big awareness that this is way up. So as you drop, can you stay open, aligned, pristine, vertical as you drop? And then you become a better shape and vessel for more of that returning wave. It can be called ground force or the returning wave. So we're going to do something a little bit more advanced, a little bit more subtle. And this is actually an internal training technique. We're not going to do any arm swings at all, just for a moment. If they move a little bit, that's fine, but the arms aren't part of this awareness really. We're going to do that same drop or bounce. And what I'd like you to do, this is harder and more subtle. It takes more internal focus. And this is why we haven't really done it yet. And most people are not ready for it. They're ready for this maybe. So it's the same thing. But what I want you to do is every time you drop and press down, as you know, as we've discussed for a long time, that sends a return wave or the ground force up into the body, the ground path up into your body. So what I want you to do is every time you press down, of course, that means the ground is pressing back up into you more. So if I weigh, whatever I weigh, pressing down for that moment, I weigh a bit more, and that force is coming, extra force is coming through me. If you stand on a scale, of course, if you do this, you got another 20, 30 pounds. That means not only your weight plus 20, 30 pounds more is coming up into your body. Now, how far can you bring that up? We've done this in Tai Chi for sure, where how far can we bring the ground path up, the ground force up through the ground path, eventually up to the top of the head and beyond. So pressing into the ground is a little shot of extra force, extra weight, extra pressure, potentially moving up through the body. And then the job here, the training is, can I empty the body, clarify the body, empty the body to bring that higher and higher and further up the body? Every time you drop the weight, send the weight down, press into the ground, can you bring that ensuing wave, the return wave, up into the body? And see if you can track how far it makes its way up. Eventually, or partially, you can get some of that coming right to the very top of the head. So this is an example of a very physical process, a very physical exercise that is a very spiritual result, in the sense that it makes you an empty vessel, transparent, turns your body into a transparent vessel. Now, let's kind of flip the coin for a second. I used the word spiritual a couple of times. Let's flip the coin. This is very, 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 very martial, and very specifically internal martial arts, because as I become transparent, as I become empty, if I was to have that be a punch or a strike, it's coming through purely an empty vessel. So that power from the ground comes through unimpeded into whatever is there. And so often it won't even have to be a configured strike, a manufactured strike. If I'm really pure and empty, it just becomes, hey, it might even just be a reaching out in a empathetic way. And you're this empty pipe, you're this empty vessel, and this not only ground force, but a spiritual force reverberates through it because you're empty and open, pure, divine stem. And so the martial might not even be a thought. It may, or it depends on the levels, but you can turn it into a martial thing. It becomes purer and purer, emptier and emptier for pure and pure transference of force, and therefore more and more force with less and less effort. A little bit beyond that is there might not be any martiality intention involved at all. It becomes emptier and emptier.
So would you say then, like, it might actually be a harder strike, but it's increasingly empty of aggression?
Yeah, zero aggression, zero, potentially zero. In fact, even further, it can be extremely benevolent. It can be extremely benevolent. It doesn't mean necessarily that there isn't any impact or force. There could be, but it's a different kind of quality and feeling of force. But it can be not only zero of violence, empty of violence, it can be, which is profound enough in itself, it can actually be even benevolent, even loving, fostering. It's a different realm. It's a different realm. And believe it or not, it starts with doing these physical, very physical exercises like this and all the other ones that we do, opening up the Aikido body. That's emptying the body, lengthening, emptying, opening, making the body transparent, open, porous instead of opaque. Sails fine, like fine silk, as opposed to heavy, dense canvas. The window is clear instead of being opaque. All those very physical exercises is the path towards this very, a very different quality of being. So how well can you let that, how much can you let the weight drop, like gravity work? How much can you let the weight fall? That's one aspect of it. Because at first, people can't even let that happen because they're holding and controlling everything. Everything's tight and condensed and concretized. They can't even get a real release drop. Again, so much of internal martial arts is release, release, release. Opening and releasing, just so we can release and let go. And one aspect of that, just so gravity can work. Just that takes people a long, long time. But that's part of it. The other part of it is, how much can I allow the return wave? How much now can I not only be released, soft, relaxed, and released, how much can I be empty to allow that ensuing wave, return wave, to move through me? And then you start to get physical understanding of being empty and open. And now your psyche, your mind and your psyche can be empty and open because you know it, you feel it, you understand it. You have a biological, tangible experience of emptiness, openness, transparency, expansiveness, porousness where inside, outside, this is you out here. That out there is also in here. It becomes a real understanding, organic understanding, not an intellectual spirituality. So it's something as simple exercises, including this one, is actually training for all that. Again, let's see if we can take the arms out of it. Release, press down. How much can you let that reverberate up through your body? Now, some of that is relaxation. How much can I relax? But again, really beyond that, it's how much can we open the body, release and open the body. Now, at first, those are just words. But there will be, eventually, if you work with these qualities and exercises, they're say, oh, that's what emptiness of body means. It truly is a quality, literally, of empty and open. But at first, of course, you have to struggle around in the dark, feel around in the dark. What does that mean? Okay, I'll try to be empty. It's like, again, a very stiff, hard muscle man trying to be empty and open. Okay, I'll be empty and open. You can't do it. But eventually, you chip away at the stone. Eventually, you melt the iceberg. And then, you can start to discover what openness is. Pressing down, can you be open? Pressing down, can you be open? Pressing down, let it open up through your body. Let it open your body. Let your body be open so it can come up, and let it open your body. So this is very much, again, it might seem very subtle. Of course, it's very subtle at first, but this is very much internal arts training. And in Tai Chi, we work with this more and more. Now, find a rhythm where an intentional vector where your arms will start to swing. We'll go back to this very simple arm swing.
Frustrating because this is good content to have the technology crap out so often.
And I think we're probably going to, for some reason, I lost the time aspect. Maybe we're not going to have any time. I'm not sure. It's just not showing. Oh, wow. Okay. So let's just kind of take this into Minucci. Hang out. Be open and empty. Open and empty. Vertical. So you're open and empty. Press down the back